G'day everybody, and for those who have come in late, you're listening to Expand the Fantasy Podcast. Hello, we are the Chronicle Chamber team, and this is Expand the Fantasy Podcast. Our website is chroniclechamber.com, and you can contact us via our email, which is chroniclechamber@gmail.com. If you want to listen to our podcast, you can subscribe to us via our YouTube, iTunes, or if you listen to us via an Android device, via their several apps as well. This is episode 182, the Phantom's 85th birthday.
I wonder if we were going to mention the song.
My name is Jermaine, and I am joined today by Dan, who's already introduced himself. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good. Getting chirpy early. Sorry. No, I just listeners will be
following the run sheet.
No, they'll have no idea what the song was about, and I hope we didn't put anyone off. They're checking the dial on the car radio to go, hang on, how have I got to FM 104.5? So no, you are listening to the Expand the Phantom podcast, and I'm happy to be joining you tonight for the birthday chat, Jim.
Yes, it's always good to talk birthdays. 85 years. Talking about 85 years. Stephen, how are you?
A bit less than 85, but happy birthday, Phantom. Cheers.
Hang on, it's a school night.
Hope you have a school night. Well, it might not be for me. The news might not have travelled up to Queensland, but Victoria's back into a snap lockdown, and yeah, great.
Oh, there's nothing better than to do recording a podcast with your fellow Phantom buddies, podcasters. I don't know, one of the two. But anyway, we're going to
as long as you're staying safe and talking Phantom, that's what it's about.
Yeah, that's it. There could be worse things you could be up to at the moment. So, as we've already talked about, this is going to be, we're celebrating the Phantom's 85th birthday. So, on this day back in 1936, the Phantom strip was first introduced to us on the February the 17th of 1936. The Phantom wasn't introduced until a couple of days later. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a bit of fun, and then we're going to introduce each decade, so going from the 1930s to the 2010s, and then we're going to go from there, and then we're going to have a bit of a talk about, choose kind of like some key moments that we've identified in those decades, and then we're going to choose some of our favourite moments, and then we're going to have a little bit of fun at the end. So this is not an exhaustive list, but this is some stuff that kind of we've come up with. And so if you disagree with us, of course you can chat with us and disagree with us on social media or via email and stuff like that as well. So what we're going to do, we'll take in turns going through. Stephen, you're the first one to be on the podcast. I mean, on the Zoom call tonight. So, do you want to kick us off, and we'll go with the 1930s and tell us a couple of the key moments, and then tell us some of your favourite moments, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so the 1930s, as Jermaine mentioned in the introduction, was when the Phantom hit the newspapers. Was it 17th of February 1936, correct?
Yep.
Good. I had to get that one stuffed up. So some big events happened straight away. We've got the oath, the oath of the skull. We have the establishment of the legend and the law straight away. And, of course, there's the love between Diana and the Phantom. And there's comics already in the 1930s. Yugoslavia, Brazil, and Italy, just to name a few. So he really hit the ground running when the Phantom appeared. And as we do know, the Phantom does beat Batman and Superman by a good couple of years. So as the first costumed or tight-wearing superhero, or some people don't like to call him a superhero, but I'm going
comic book hero
for arguments. Now, my favourite moments of the 1930s, I don't know. I think I've got a bit of a variety here. I've tried to keep it short and sweet, but I think starting off with Diana sparring in the first few panels of the Singh Brotherhood. So you don't even see the Phantom at the start. You see his love interest. Excuse me. But yeah, she's sparring. She's boxing in the first few panels there. So it establishes a good, strong presence, and she will not be some damsel in distress, even though sometimes she does become that. But I do like it when writers give her that strength that she exhibited right from day one.
Yeah.
Another one of my favourite moments is the Phantom emerging from the waters to board the Singh's ship in the same story, in the Singh Brotherhood story. So our first picture of the Phantom. I've got someone's done I think it was Glenn Ford did a print of that a few years ago, and I think I've got that just over to my left. And I think, yeah, the 1930s straight away, Lee Falk has developed a solid base for the character to build on. So I think it was a great start for the character. Dan, what do you reckon?
Oh yeah, much the same, mate. If you're talking about what was huge and important in the first 5 years of the Phantom comic strip, just the fact that it existed, and burst into life makes this one of the obvious greatest decades of the Phantom for me. The story and the character development, when you consider that there's no way that Lee Falk could have had certainly 85 years in mind, let alone did he even have 5 years in mind for the comic book strip? We don't know, for the comic strip in the newspapers. Likely he was hoping to get through a couple of months and then see how it went and all the rest of it, and he couldn't have anticipated how it blew up in the first 5 years. So whilst there are certainly, if you wanted to go back and go, well, let's get some drafting notes on the stories, you'd certainly tighten up some things and all the rest of it. The fact that Lee Falk's writing a serial that he doesn't know where it will end or where it will go, and some of the stories, I just want to rattle through the first 10 stories, and that basically first 10 daily stories I'm going to focus on, and that takes us through from 1936 through to near the end of 1939. So you've mentioned the Singh Brotherhood. It's followed by the Sky Band, then War in the Jungle, Little Toma, The Prisoner of the Himalayas, Adventure in Algiers, The Shark's Nest, Fishers of Pearls, The Slave Traders, and The Mysterious Girl. Now, we're very lucky in Australia. Well, some would say unlucky, but whatever. We've seen a number of reprints of those stories, so they're very familiar to a lot of Australian readers in particular. And they're just sensational stories for mine. And then I guess to speak to you, the other thing that I thought was fantastic about the 30s was it proved that the Phantom's global popularity was such that he was popular enough to pirate, and we started seeing even unlicensed stories popping up at the end of the 1930s already, which just again speaks to how popular he was. What about you, Jan?
That's a good point. Like there was the Yugoslavian one. I think the Italians actually like redrew the stories and kind of like remodeled the stories as well. So that's a good point. I like Stephen's point where they show Diana as such a strong character at the start. Because, this was, picture it from the 1930s now. Obviously, we weren't around then. But, we can do a little bit of history. We can know a little bit that not every female shown in media in the 1930s would have been shown like that in a bathing suit, boxing up and beating a hardened sailor. That's something that you wouldn't normally see. I think probably for the first month, maybe even 2 months, all we see is Diana in a bathing suit. Again, that's probably something we don't see. We wouldn't normally see as well. Probably helped that Lee Falk was a red-blooded young 20-year-old man, and so he wanted a bit of that as well. But that would have it all kind of came together that it was a strong character. The Phantom was strong, but probably Diana in the first story, or at least the first half of the story, was probably the stronger one. She was probably more of the hero than the Phantom in a lot of ways. So, that's a brilliant point, Steve. For me, it has to be the Oath, because the Oath is something that we'd never seen before. Like we'd seen people, in some of this, in some of the other books and pulp fiction stories and stuff like that. We saw like the Shadow and that where they were fighting against what we call it, injustice and all that. But it wasn't. There was always the one generation. This was kind of like, this is the first hero where we see a multi-generational lineage. Everything about the Oath is just so powerful. And we see Batman take a lot of reference from it, and a lot of other characters as well. Like Spider-Man and all these other characters became heroes because of someone who died. It's all taking key elements from the Phantom. And then with what you said also, Dan, about the worldwide appeal, like having comics from around the world, I forgot to list a couple, but Australia had Women's Weekly in the 1930s, Italy, Women's Mirror. I think, I can't remember at the top of my head, but you're looking at probably about 7 or 8 countries that were publishing the Phantom within 5 years of it being in newspapers, which is very strong. So, they're probably the two things that stand out for me is the strength of the Oath, and then also the comics from around the world. And then probably a third one will be your point, Stephen, about Diana being such a strong woman.
I think it was just a fantastic idea. Like, you're absolutely right. The Oath, which was about 6 months in, I think, or about halfway through the first story when Falk actually brought that out. And it was almost, you're right, that's the moment that the actual Phantom, as we all understand him to be, was revealed. This generational do-gooder, mysterious and incredibly powerful. And even at that stage, establishing that ghostly Phantom presence that people were feared of. It was a great storyline, a great idea for a character, and it was clearly popular then, and it's still popular now.
Yeah, and then we saw it probably about maybe 3 weeks before the Phantom told his story. We see the legacy of the Phantom being told by someone else about when you got this elderly gentleman who's probably in his 60s or 70s telling about how he first encountered the Phantom 50 years ago. And so whether Lee Falk, like you said, whether Lee Falk had planned it all or whether it was a happy accident, the fact that it established and created that mystery, and then it was created rather than the other way around or something like that. It really adds to the heroic nature, the mysteric nature, that man behind the shadows, that man that, does he exist, does he not exist? It appeals to that, and I think sometimes we kind of lose that. But Lee Falk really hit the nail on the head at the start of his legacy with that.
Steve, you got anything else you wanted to add about the 30s?
I thought someone was going to go on about the 40s now.
Yeah.
I thought if we're going to had 20 minutes on each decade, this is going to go for a long time.
Especially when the decade's only half a decade, the 30s.
I think that was only about, I think it was 6 minutes. So Dan, you want to tell us about the 40s?
Sure. I will just jump straight to the run sheet because I'm flicking around. Okay, here we are, the 1940s. So obviously there's some massive events in the 40s. We're talking about, I guess, years 5 through to 15. So that's that, we're going through the growth stage and then the early teenage years of the Phantom, and everyone knows that those years are testing. And historically, obviously, the World War II just slap bang all over the 40s as well. So a lot of social upheaval, a lot of upheaval for the strip with both Lee Falk and Ray Moore being called into the armed forces, and the impact that had on the creative team, with suggestions that Lee Falk had a ghostwriter in Alfred Bester, and certainly Wilson McCoy started filling in for Ray Moore, in and out, sometimes credited, often not. So that was all huge. We also saw the first branching away from just comic books with the serial, and also the movie serial, 15-part Tom Tyler episodes, as well as the Big Little books they'd already been in the 1930s, a couple, but it was the Son of the Phantom, the Walt Whitman book started coming out. So other variations of or other tellings of the story. We also had Mr. Walker appear for the first time, which is huge. We had the first mainstream merchandise appear, which was huge. There's arguments about whether that was the Easter egg transfer stickers or the costume, or I heard there's all sorts of suggestions about what the earliest ones could be, but those are probably the first two that we've been able to identify. Huge decade, lots going on. So let's flick around back the other way this time. Jermaine, what did you think was the most important thing of the 1940s? And I bet you're going to say something that I've just forgot to mention.
Yeah, I think it will be something that we all probably make mention that. Yeah, it kind of got lost, and that will be Free. Obviously, that was 1940. What was that? 48 or 49?
48. Yeah.
48 memory. But Free, for the obvious reasons, still been going on 70 odd years later. Fairly continuous, not many breaks in between. I won't spend too much time on Free because that's an obvious one. The other one would have to be Alfred Bester, just purely because, and I'll probably put Alfred Bester and Wilson McCoy together, because they were able to make sure the Phantom, you could argue, probably became even better when they took on the mantle. We can have that argument later, but in a lot of cases, Lee Falk, Ray Moore, the two creators, disappear. A lot of hero strips would have ended, but the fact that they were able to continue on with the Phantom, introduce new elements like Mr. Walker alias, some may even argue the first engagement, and then also I'm forgetting something, the first Son of the Phantom as well, was argued by some that it was created by Alfred Bester as well. So, key elements like that, which adds to the lore and which are still being used today, are kind of credited unofficially to someone like an Alfred Bester. And then the fact that Wilson McCoy was able to copy Ray Moore's style and continue on, that is a key moment for me.
What about you, Steve?
I've put down, what have I put in? Through, of course, the serial. So we're getting our first taste of the Phantom on the screen. And then I had a tie between the Phantom Goes to War and Mr. Walker aliases. Mr. Walker alias, sorry, as my big things of the decade. Phantom Goes to War is just a seminal story that you can reread 100 times. It's phenomenal, and definitely of its time, of course, but also as it is, it's a great time capsule of what was happening in the world during the war. So
the serial was a good one. Yeah, the serial was a good one. Yeah,
for all its faults, you got a German Shepherd and what have you, and but it is the 1940s. But we've got our hero on the big screen already. So.
Yeah, I think it was filmed in New York, Central Park as well, I believe. Okay. So yeah, but it was big. There was people still collect the movie posters. There's the film negatives, and I reckon I enjoyed watching it the first time I ever watched it, which would have been probably 15, 18, maybe 20 years ago. I really enjoyed it, and I've watched bits and pieces since.
I've got it on video here, VHS.
Yeah, mine was on VHS. I brought it from. You remember when Free had it advertised?
I think so.
Big Sky Media.
Yeah,
Big Sky Video.
I have a feeling that was organised, or certainly they were also sold through the Phantom Club as well.
This is one I've got. Hang on.
The red cover.
The red cover, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't get the VHS, but I do have it on DVD, and I went to watch it. I've probably, I must be honest, I've probably only seen the first 6 episodes. I haven't actually watched the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen the whole thing either, if I'm truthful.
Because they're 15, 20 minutes each, the episode.
Yeah.
And then times 15, it actually drags out quite a lot. So I need to probably set it up and watch it as a serial once a night or something like that.
And I think in it, the Phantom's alias is not Mr. Walker, because I think it was around that time that
Not invented yet.
Well, no, they're kind of like right next to each other.
Right.
But it would have taken a little while to film, so it would have like probably just come out in the newspapers, or so when it was originally written, it wouldn't be known as Mr. Walker.
Yeah.
I remember, I think it was Jim Shepard made a point about it or something like that, and it wasn't until like, probably half a dozen years ago that I actually kind of looked at the dates and I thought, well, there's an obvious reason why he wasn't called Mr. Walker in that.
Yeah. Well, for mine, and maybe because I haven't watched it, the serial hasn't crept into my top things of the 1940s. Probably the two that I have are both story based, I suppose. Phantom Goes to War as a story. The Inexorables, it's also known as. I think that's the actual title, but it's just known as Phantom Goes to War. That's a huge story for mine, and I read that when I was 13, 14, and like so many of us, and I know Jermaine yourself, into Commando comics as well as Phantom comics and Foot Rot Flats and that sort of stuff. But Phantom Goes to War seemed to be that perfect mix of the Phantom and a Commando comic. And whether it stands up or not to 2020 standards, when you go to read it, the political correctness and all the rest of it, it probably doesn't. But for a thing that's of its time, it still has a powerful female role in Diana. She's a very strong character throughout the story. Does need saving a couple of times, of course, but that's only because she's put her life on the line and gone above and beyond, as all the heroes do in the story. So that's just a classic Phantom story for mine. And I guess the other part of it, is more lighthearted as we go through the 40s, and it's a lot of stories that started to come out about the Phantom and Diana being attractive to other people and getting their share of admirers and that sort of thing. And some of the more fun stories, or the ones that sort of toy with, the Phantom and Diana might not get together because there's others on the scene. The Game of Alvar, where I'm looking here, the Crooner, the Maharaja's Daughter, the Wild Girl fell in love with the Phantom. There's just so many stories through this period. The Flirtatious Princess. There's so many stories where, that sort of dynamic of will they, won't they, especially because the engagement, as you mentioned, Germ, did come earlier in the 40s, and then we suddenly are followed with all of these will they, won't they stories. So,
the Governor and Susie.
Soap opera.
The Governor and Susie was straight after the engagement. And throughout it, the Phantom, you can basically see him wavering, where it was kind of like, well, Diana's not interested in me. She's, you can kind of see it. And then she dies, which kind of helps save that.
And that's what it often was in terms of will the relationship get together. They always kind of wanted to, but he's always away and she doesn't know where he is, and has trouble proving to her parents that he even exists. And as far as he's concerned, she's often on the other side of the world, or he's just missed her, or so just that dynamic of that relationship.
And it's humorous, like and it's good fun, and I like it. Which was that story? I think at the start it's actually called Diana's Progress or something. I think it might be in the 30s, but there's where he actually does get married. He whisks him off where she goes down where Diana goes down the, what do you call it?
Aisle.
The aisle, that's the one. It's been a while since I've had to walk down
there. To Jermaine's wife, if she's listening.
And
what day are we recording this on?
Tonight's Valentine's Day, isn't it?
Oh, she's stuck with me now. But so there was. It was really amusing. Like the Phantom would miss the ship, or it's a good point.
And it was a cool little thing that was explored by Matt Kime in his Day at the Races. That finished on the same sort of note, which was one of the things that made it really authentic to the time period.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I enjoyed that aspect, like that ending bit where
Yeah.
they missed each other again. It's like, ah. So yeah, no, that was good. All right. Anything else you just want to add to the 40s?
No, all good.
That was 10 minutes.
Suddenly we're on the clock, Stephen. Thanks very much.
All right, the 1950s. So this is just again, it's just a little bit of a snapshot. We will be missing a few big moments, but we'll go from there. So Wilson
Well, it's a
McCoy
podcast, not an encyclopedia. Let's.
Yeah, well, that's it. You can go to Phantom Wiki if you want to learn more about the 1950s, or you'll be able to buy a Phantom Diary that will be coming out very, very soon and learn a little bit more about each decade as well. And there's a nice little plug. So,
and we'll mention that again at the end of the podcast, I think, because there's obviously a neat tie in there.
Yeah, definitely. So you might want to, while I'm doing this, you might want to put it in the run sheet, Dan, so we don't forget. Okay. So the 1950s. So again, just a small sampling. Wilson McCoy kind of becomes his own person. 1940s, he's finished ghosting and filling in and helping out Ray Moore. He's the man himself. There's a huge explosion of countries publishing comics. So there's Sweden, Brazil, then there's some more Scandinavian countries. France and Italy have kind of done a little bit of sporadic publishing, but, they're doing more publishing now. Of course, there's Through that started in 48, so, they're kicking it off as well. So there's all that type of comics around the world, heaps of comics around the world that are being published, even some in the US and stuff like that as well. A few story developments like the Jungle Patrol was created in the 1950s, which is something that it's quite unique to the Phantom. And then also the female Phantom. We were introduced to the first female Phantom. Again, something unique. There wasn't, probably in the 1950s, there would have been maybe, I think Wonder Woman was created by then, but Supergirl and, a lot of these other female lead characters like Black Widow and all these other ones weren't created back then. You've got the female Phantom. In my opinion, it's still probably underutilized. I think there's a real, I think there's something that could be really explored with the female Phantom, but we'll get into that later. So there's a couple of things in the 1950s. We were introduced the Phantom. We were told that is the 21st Phantom. The Good Mark is introduced as well. There's a lot of probably. I don't want to say modernizing the Phantom because I think that's probably the 60s, but creating more of a deeper layer to the Phantom, I guess, might be a good way of explaining what kind of happened in the 50s. Dan, what about you, mate? Is there anything that I've missed or anything that I've said that you want to echo that was your favourites in the 1950s?
Yeah, well, I feel like I don't want to steal all of Steve's thunder as well, because I know we're going to talk about similar topics here, but the exploding audience around the world is exactly what you said there, Jermaine. The fact that people all around the world in all sorts of languages and all sorts of colours and that sort of thing are starting to see the Phantom in newspaper strips and in comic books, and so that leads us, ultimately to today, where we can make networks of friends from around the world in India and Brazil and Sweden and Norway and all over because of this global popularity of the character, which was just outstanding. And certainly gives people like you and Chris Hill something to collect too, in terms of finding more books from around the world.
I think he's down and the other 4 and I'm down to 1. So right. the race is still on.
And then the other part is so many pieces of lore that came about, and I made that analogy earlier about teenagers. So we've got 15 to 25 years old now as a character, and we really start to see that maturing of the legend, and we start to find out the depth of the 21st Phantom and the Good Mark ring, which it's amazing that it took. That that the first 20 years or so of the Phantom didn't have a good mark. So it's only the last 3/4 of the stories have got a good mark. But you hear what I'm saying. It's like they establish the growth of the character and the depth of the legend that was established.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. We've probably had more stories about the good mark than we've actually had about the skull mark.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, the skull mark's always been there. You don't need to re-establish it. And it was surprising that it's the 50s before the good mark is introduced, which is one of my points too.
Should have gone to you first, Stephen, because now it looks like you're just copying Dan's homework.
Oh, I did. I did.
Well,
I was about to say something.
Well, I'm going to add something new because I've just while you were talking, I found something else out. So I wasn't really listening to what Dan said, but I'm going to say the Jungle Patrol on the 21st in line. So if that's what Dan says, I'm not going to jump. I'm not going to repeat it. But you're mentioning about the female superheroes. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the first female superhero was someone called Phantoma. So I know a bit of a.
What year was that?
1940. Phantoma was the first female superhero with superhuman powers to appear in print in Jungle Comics. The first masked and costume superhero line, and of natural birth, whoever, was the Woman in Red. So we'll scratch woman. Well, I don't know. Phantom sometimes wears red, so might be a link in there. But yeah, it's just interesting that the first female superhero was someone with a name very similar to Phantom and appeared in a Jungle comic.
Yeah.
But
I agree with the appearance of Julie too can't be understated, especially probably 40 years later, and beyond. It was sort of a bit of a one-off, and it's not something that Falk went back to in the strip. But once other creators started to explore that character, I think that and that's probably only in the last 10 to 20 years, really. A little burst
really fleshed out now a bit.
But yeah,
you had the Charlton comics. And then
Moonstone did some.
Egmont did some in the 80s, I believe it, Julie, which was a great story. And then you've got Moonstone, and then you've kind of got recently. I really think it's a character that, whether it's Fru or Andreas at Team Phantom or whoever, but I really think it's something that could be, I guess, explored a lot better, and stuff like that. Whether it's even if you go as far as a like how Marvel and DC do it, where they have like a spin-off series, a What If, or where it's Heloise as the. Yeah, they don't, but you know what I'm saying. Like you could, there's so much strength there, and it could draw in another element of readers and stuff like that. You've got Heloise, who's a strong character,
and that's what I was about
Julie,
to say.
You've got Julie, who was the 17th. I think it's something that probably the Phantom world's missing at the moment.
Well, I think that was what I was going to add to that, was that Julie paved the way for Heloise to be allowed to be considered as the Phantom, and without that appearance in the 1950s. Lee Falk, I don't know if he realised that it's a bit of a conundrum, because the comic book would have been so much easier in a sense if it was just, right, let's roll on to the next boy. But by creating Julie, he's paved the way for Heloise to also be part of it. And that's almost, creators seem to almost trip on that. Or should we have Heloise? Should we have Kit? Do we have both? Like it's a tricky juggle at the moment, and people are trying to explore. So, but I 100% agree. I think more for me, more Heloise stories. I think the story of Julie, the way it's been explored, is a little bit done. I think just the stories that we saw in the Female Phantom annual, gathering all those together. Perhaps I feel like I know all of her story. Maybe a clever creator can fill a gap that I haven't seen. But I'd like to see some more Heloise stories. Like there was even a story where Diana took over from the Phantom. Maybe you could go past Phantom's wives who had it taken over or something. I'm sure there could be, did the Phantom always have just the one child?
Not always. There was one.
Yeah.
We had at least 4.
Yeah. So, like, is there other brothers and sisters that we aren't aware of? And I don't know. The options are endless. It's we've kind of got a little bit sidetracked, so we won't stay too long. So for me, some of the key moments for the 1950s for myself has to be the explosion of the countries publishing the Phantom, and it's not just a sporadic publishing the Phantom or anything. It's like, Brazil published 400, 500, no, it's about 600-700 comics. Sweden's, close, I think they're over 1,500, which has led the way for Norway, which was over 1,000. I think it was about 1,200. Finland did just under 1,000 comics. So it's really created a solid. It's allowed the fans to become part of pop culture in those countries. So that's key. And then the other one is the Jungle Patrol. Again, I would rather see a side story of the Jungle Patrol than a Phantom Gladiator or a Phantom Pharaoh or something like that. I think the Jungle Patrol there's been strong people that have been created. Weeks, Warraboo, Smith, which we saw in the recent Vietnam story. There's all these good Phantom people. I would rather see spin-off stories about the Jungle Patrol than a Christopher D. Arendt, who's a knight who may or may not be related to our Phantom.
I really like that idea. Yeah.
That's me getting off my high horse from the 1950s. When was that would have been around the time when the whole burning your bra and all that. What era was that?
The 60s was the bra burning era. Although there is debate as to say, did that ever actually happen, or was that trumped up at the time? So we don't know. Well, but yeah,
I wasn't.
But we did know that the 60s happened, and these are a few things that happened in them.
Good work, Stephen.
There we go.
All right, get us back on track, Steve.
So in the 60s, we had Cy Barry taking the pencil or the ink, whatever you'd like to say. He was now drawing the Phantom. And there was a modernisation of the character and of the whole strip. Bengala was a former British colony, was now going to be a democracy in its own right. And we have some outside of Folk, we've got other publishers creating their own stories, in RGE and Semic creating their own stories. And we've got Eden comes along in 1960s, which is still what did I read? Oh, it was in the annual, of course, about hers and his and the little dinosaurs. And of course, there was Rex, who also appeared in the 1960s. And he's one of my best bits of the 60s, old Rex, because there's just when I first read the Phantom, Rex was a big character. Rex and Tom Tom, that's his mate's name, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they'll be, always asking Uncle Walker for a story from the Chronicles. There was a way to get a Chronicle story. Was Rex asking the Phantom for a story, and they're trying to get away from the lessons from Miss Tagamar and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I love that. It was like what was that one? Black Glove, when they were talking about Black Plague. And throughout the whole story, Miss Taggart going, "What has this story got to do with the Black Plague?" And it wasn't to the right at the end, but yeah, they're just great. There was a great, an innocent way of reading the stories back then when I was a child.
And now that I've said that out loud, I think that might have been a good hook to get me into the Phantom in the first place, because the Rex would have been, about my age when I was, first started reading. So it's a nice little hook to get the young reader in, having a younger character that you can, somewhat identify with. I'm not a king or, doing all that sort of stuff.
Found in the Russians.
But,
not running around in your jocks.
Sorry?
Not running around in your jocks.
Not for a long time. Other big things about this decade, the expansion of Phantom countries. So I think we had Whispering Woods and I think that was a part of it. And Kilauea, I think, was that another one? And
Yeah.
I'm trying to, from what I read earlier, I haven't got it on my notes here.
Phantom Peak, the Phantom Peak, Boomsby Penitentiary Prison, Whispering Grove.
So they're all coming up.
Table.
Yeah. So all these big things that that are now synonymous with the Phantom and Bangala and the land surrounding the deep woods. We know that there's more than just Morristown or Mawitan and the deep woods. There's all these other areas around there. So I think that's a big thing. Of course, the Scandinavian stories have had a huge influence on the Phantom. President Lawaga, I think, is a big one, of course, but no one can get the legacy of Cy Barry off the top perch there, being the most one of the most important things of the 60s.
I think. Well, I know I agree with you as Cy Barry being the biggest influence or the biggest moment of the 1960s, and I'm sure Dan will probably agree with me on that one as well. But I think besides that, for me, it would have to be RGE, which is the Brazilian publisher, and Sweden creating their own stories, because it allowed more Phantom, because Scandinavia and Brazil, they were publishing lots and lots of stories, and then they had the dilemma of, well, do we keep publishing them, which is what Frew did, or do we create our own stories? And it's added, whether you like them all or whether you don't like them all, but it's added so much more to the character. And it's also mean that we'll be able to see more creators than just one set of creators from the newspaper strip. We've seen people like Valvi, Granberg, all the Brazilian creators, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce. But there's been so many great creators from all around the world that we've got to see. Sparta from Fratello Sparta as well, which was in the 60s as well. So they're probably the biggest two for me. It's really what about you, Dan? Anything you?
Yeah, much the same. Like I haven't written my dot points on the shared run sheet, but I've got a page of notes here, and it's like you've read over my shoulder, Germ. Cy Barry, as both of you guys have said, and for all of the obvious reasons, like the global audience that he built, and the devotees that he's got to this day. He's probably, he's the most famous and popular Phantom artist globally, and he built that following with some sensational work through the 3 decades he was on the strip. So hands down, obviously, but then exactly what you said, Jim. Just the and I'm on the record as not liking all of them. I'm probably like fewer of them than I enjoy the foreign stories, but that's often that's on me. So the depth and the breadth of the stories that were available to us in the 60s. No, my next point is for the 70s, but the licensed stories all over the world, and Team Phantom starting to go towards the end of that. That's when the crew in Sweden there were starting to go, well, hang on, let's actually start driving this character somewhere rather than just tells point in time stories. They started to want to build their own continuity and build into the Lee Falk continuity. So that was that decision, I think, rather than go off on a what if tangent or this is our version of the Phantom, but to go, no, we're going to build into what Lee Falk has created. I think that was inspired and has really helped flesh out the world as we know it, although Sandor Singh can go jump in a lake.
Well, it might have cooled it down a little bit. So no, definitely. Although that's not until we've still got another 40 or 50 years.
No, I know, but I'm going to get crankier about
it. All right, well, Dan, while you're on the long run up, why don't you start off with the 1970s?
Sure. Okay. So the 1970s is the greatest decade of all, obviously, because all of the big guns on the podcast were born in the 1970s. So a huge decade for Phantom. Other big events, as I sort of alluded to there, with Team Phantom taking their own creative bent. They and Alf Grunberg would say now unapologetically looked to drive a philosophical or a political ideology into the fandom. Not super overtly, although some of the stories that have been published more recently by Frew suggest that maybe we in Australia haven't necessarily seen the strongest of them. But certainly the fandom started to have a left lean to him politically from the Swedish comics. They also started to produce more Phantom stories than even the newspaper strip, just by sheer weight of numbers. We also saw a whole bunch of new characters, and I'll grab my list up for that here because I did have that list of characters created in the 70s. Sorry, got myself off a roll. So Old Man Moz, Dogai Singh, which was a Team Fundament creation, Morai Tribe of Fishermen, which seemed almost embedded for mine, the Wasaka Tribe. So we actually saw the explanation, the full explanation of the first Phantom and how he came to be. So that's highly significant. President Garanda, a far more minor character. Solomon and Nefertiti, the Dolphins, who are synonymous with Eden now. Hers, Hers, and Steggy, which of course everybody loves because that's.
I do.
And of course, Kid Jr. and Heloise, the twins, were born after the wedding, which of course is probably the biggest moment in the development of the story in the 1970s. So I've jumped all over the shop there, but there's a whole lot going on in the 70s. While I get my head back around it, Steve, what did you think was the key moments for you of the 70s?
Key moments, the wedding and the heirs. They're the two biggest things and longest lasting come out of the 70s stories. And in regards to characters, Old Man Moz is a favourite of mine, so I'm giving him a vote. I like Old Man Moz, and when he's done or written well, he's written really well and brings a whole new element to the stories.
See, I can't stand Old Man Moz.
Oh, really?
Get nicked.
I liked him when he was a storyteller, but then when he became a seer in the 1990s,
Team Fundament did that.
It was Tony D. Paul that did that.
In Team Fundament.
Who was introduced it into the newspaper stories. So you're blaming not the creator, but the
publisher.
The publisher. Where I'm in my opinion, that's the one thing that I don't like that Tony D. Paul has done, is the fact that he turned Old Man Moz into a seer instead of just a storyteller. I
like both sides. He's got the history, he's got the future.
Yeah.
He's the internet.
The jungle internet. I do like that. But no, see, I like him like telling the stories and stuff, and I like how like Lee Falk made him, like long-winded, and then like someone will cut in and start telling the story, and he'll stop and he'll say, "Now may I continue?" And it was just oops, sorry about that, audio listeners. I kind of like that type of bit, but yeah. The wedding and the heirs, we'll probably agree on there. But for me, besides the wedding and the heirs, has to be that Phantom Men became the biggest producer of the Phantom, and they still are the biggest producer of the Phantom. What are we now? 50 years later. It's been a huge explosion from them, and that alongside the wedding and the heirs, that would have to be probably the biggest one for me.
Yeah. Well, I reckon probably my two, if I try to settle on two, was, and I sort of alluded to it there with the Wasaka Tribe about the telling of the first Phantom story for the first time. We had heard the oath, we'd heard the snippet of how it happened, but the 1970s story, the first Phantom in the newspaper strip, was the first time we actually heard Lee Falk's version of how that unfolded. And Team Fundament also did a story on the first Phantom called The Avenger, and again, people will like it or not like it, but it was the first time it was explored. The 70s was huge for tellings of previous Phantoms. So even though we know from the 50s that the Phantom is the 21st Phantom, for the first time. And this is part of the creative teams going global and Sweden and Brazil being able to write their first Phantoms. But for the first time, we hear stories about the 7th, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and the 18th Phantom. And of course, Kit and Heloise as the 22nd Phantom are also born in the 70s. So a huge exploration of the family tree, if you like. So I think that was, again, in terms of deepening that legend and being able to go, oh, hang on, we could tell about this character in all different points of history. It was like the 70s was when they realised that was possible. And we've all been the benefit of it since.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, actually. I hadn't really thought about that, but because, I also liked, like the 70s, not only, they tend to, like Lee Falk tended to write more stories about past Phantoms in the 70s as well. And whether that he was inspired from what Team Phantom did or whether Team Phantom was inspired by what Lee Falk did, when we create a time machine, we'll find the answer for that one. But yeah, it was just like it was almost like every second story by Lee Falk and Team Phantom was about a past Phantom. So it's a brilliant point.
As I've said, we've joked sometimes about Frew opening the drawer and finding the Facebook password. It was almost in the 70s. The creative team opened the drawer and there was a note in there saying, "Write about a past Phantom."
Yeah, and it's like, and we started seeing like the Phantom being tied into key moments in history as well.
Yeah.
Like there's the what's it called? I think it's the Bastille fire, I think in Germany or in France. And there's all these type of ones. So yeah, it's a very good point that you brought up. 70s was an exciting era for new things. All right.
The 80s, AJ.
The 80s. Well, the 80s was when I was born. So
a good decade. So
it was a good decade. So you're on your own.
I stand by what I said about the 70s.
So apart from our birthdays, there was an explosion of merchandise in Australia and Sweden. And I think up until then, there was always merchandise, but there was not merchandise. We started to see heaps of it. So, but only, we also started seeing Phantom clubs and mass producing of comics in Sweden, Australia, Brazil. That was kind of like when they were at their peak. It was kind of like the 70s and 80s. And it was just, the Phantom was probably at also his peak in popular culture. You got Paul Hogan, you've got Defenders of the Earth. In Sweden, you had a whole section of an amusement park called Phantom Land, which lasted from the 80s until I think it was around the mid 2000s. And then also Jim Shepard started it through as well. So it was an exciting period of time to be a Phantom fan in the 1980s. Stephen, what are some things that jump out at you from the 1980s?
Well, of course, the Defenders of the Earth cartoon. Waking up on a Saturday morning or whenever it was that was on, and seeing the Phantom do battle in spaceships against Ming the Merciless with his mates Flash Gordon and Mandrake and Lothar was great. It was a bit different having a daughter rather than a son. You've grown accustomed to seeing Kit Jr. Being next, so that was a nice little breakaway. Just to a tangent off tradition, but I think it worked well. Of course, Jim Shepard at Fruit did fantastic stuff, and his legacy goes without saying. It'll be long lasting. And something that I've put here, something that I remember, one of my earliest memories of the Phantom, and I'm sure it happened in the 1980s, was seeing the iconic blue cover at garage sales or at market stalls or something like that. And if I happen to have a couple of bucks, picking up a comic, and I'm not sure if that happened in the late 80s or early 90s when I started doing that. But the iconic blue cover, I think, is synonymous with those. I'm sure it's in the 70s and 80s. I could check my
you're right.
now. But yeah,
Yeah. Dan?
Oh, look, just you saying about the cover there, Steve has reminded me about the yellow title strip that came across the top of.
See, I hate the yellow title strip.
Oh yeah, it's not. I understand that, but for me, it was just that sweet spot when I was buying the comics, and I'd walk into the newsagent, and you could identify it straight away. Yes, you see the blue comic, but you can tell from the title at a glance, right? This is the new one. Boom, I'm picking it up, and it's got its detractors, but it did its job in terms of making the comic jump off the newsagent shelf. So there was that, and whether Jim Shepard was behind that idea or not, but I have said that his taking over of Frew obviously is a huge thing in the 1980s, and the change of business model, the extra effort that seemed to go into the comics. Everybody, I guess, in a new job in the first 5 or 6 years or whatever it might be is full of enthusiasm and changes, and bringing in the Phantom Forum and bringing in more of the Scandinavian stories. Just showed that Jim was prepared to
What was
mix
that, Dan? Was that a highlight of the 1980s for you? More Team Phantom stories.
No, it's historically massively important, and some of one of my favorite first stories, and this probably is from the 70s, but issue 765 is the Scarecrow, a Scandinavian story. Don Ovanel, I think, might have been the artist for that one, or Jamie Valvey, one of those guys. And it was a historical story about a pirate who dressed up as a scarecrow to help lure pirates, ships onto the beach, setting up false lighthouse type thing. And I love that story. So I'm not going to shirk from some of the Scandinavian stories. There are others I don't like. It's as simple as that. And obviously, and Jim also brought in the less edited reprints and that sort of thing. And then the other one has to be the Phantom Club of Australia, the John Henderson Club. That was something that I joined and have my membership still proudly hanging on the wall, just over on the other side of that shelf. I had all the cards, and as a young teenager, the preteen I must have been at the end of the 80s. Phantom Club and all the merch and the newsletters and the letters from Olga and all the rest of it. The Phantom Club was a huge part of the 80s for me personally. And if it's not for you, well, bad luck.
I've kind of been covered with you guys. So mine would have to be the Phantom Clubs, also in Sweden and Norway and stuff like that as well. And then also with Jim Shepard at Frew, just being able to produce the unedited, uncensored stories was such a landmark decision that even now we're still reaping the rewards of with what we see in Herms Press and stuff like that. And that's 30, 40 years later. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the 1990s.
So there's a number of big events that happened in the 1990s. Of course, nothing gets bigger than the movie.
Yeah.
So Billy Zane stars as the Phantom in the movie in 1996. I got that right, didn't I? Yep. You thought the merchandise was big in the 80s. Merchandise is huge in the 90s. Granny Mae's, What's New, that's what we had. It was always great walking into that shop and just seeing a sea of purple. We got the Phantom 2040 comic and TV show. Semic sell to Egmont. And Phantom goes to Colour. I can't see what's happening because someone's typing over the top. There we go. Lebunga is a new character that gets introduced. And it's the opinion of at least one member of Chronicle Chamber that there's a downward trend on the quality of newspaper stories, as well as to coincide with the number of newspapers carrying Phantom stories. There's Cy Barry retired also in 1990, which is a big event. But actually, I said nothing gets bigger than the movie. Yes, one thing can outdo the movie, and that's, of course, the passing of Lee Falk at the end of the decade. And I remember when that happened, I don't know if anyone used to watch Good News Week, but I remember that made one of the segments on Good News Week. I thought, hey, I know that story. So I had the answer before they did. So that was all right. And yeah, and as I've said in my little introduction, I think the biggest things on a positive note were, of course, the movie, and yeah, plenty of merch in shops like What's New. I love going into there and just checking it out.
Yeah, you had the mugs, the rings, the
Boxer shorts, the
shirts. Yeah, it was
All the Davenport stuff, yeah.
vest,
yeah.
and all the merch that went along with the movie as well.
Mm. So actually, because little story about Davenport, because that's a WA brand, is when I was at uni, I did a summer of the Removalists, and I actually moved her house, cleaned her house as a young 20-year-old at uni. I asked if she had any Phantom stuff left, and she said no. But that's my claim to fame.
So I always thought it was Tasmania because of the name.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that every second box wasn't going in the back of your ute just in case.
I did ask. I said, "Are you got any Phantom stuff?" So I kind of put it on. She goes, "No, that's all long gone." I went, "Oh man."
Dan, what about you? What are your big things of the 90s?
Oh, look, I think we would all have the same big three. The film, Cy Barry retiring, and Lee Falk's death. For me, they're obvious standouts as the most significant things of that particular decade. To pick one that I want to focus on, I guess it ties in with what you sort of said about the downward trend of newspaper stories. Obviously, through the 1990s, we had Lee Falk in the last decade of his life. He died about halfway through 1999, and I can understand. Like even from a pure narrative quality point of view, people saying that the 1990s was a poorer quality story in the newspaper strip. So yeah, the fact that Lee Falk was able to write all the way to retirement, not retirement, he never even retired. Lee Falk wrote all the way to his deathbed. Whether that was the right idea or not, whether that is part of anyway, it's his death was huge. The fact that he had created it all the way through, and then I don't know. Yeah, I might speak a little bit more about Lee Falk's death when we talk about the next decade, actually. So I'll hold my powder dry until then.
Fair enough. Any other moments that kind of took your fancy?
Oh well, obviously the movie. Didn't like it, got to be honest. I walked out the first time I saw the movie. I turned it off, or can't remember where I saw it, whether it was in the cinema or on the TV or wherever that might have been. But I walked away from the film going, "Oh, that's a shame," and it was all to do with the ring and the magic ring, the lasers and the skulls. If it wasn't for that, I loved it, and I really, 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 really like the movie now. I really do. I think that Billy Zane was a great choice for the actor. I loved the way that he portrayed the Phantom, and I liked so much of the story. But the magic elements of the skulls and the lasers put me off, and I didn't enjoy it at the time. It was probably 3 or 4 years before I watched it again.
Yeah, fair enough. Apart from those, which are the obvious ones, other ones would be the 2040 TV series. I didn't watch The Defenders of the Earth until probably the 2000s. So for me, the 2040 series kind of probably established me as a Phantom fan more than the actual movie. While the movie was great and stuff like that, the fact that I was able to watch a 2040 episode every weekend, it was a key moment for me. And I really enjoyed the series, really enjoyed the storyline. Kind of wished there was more. If you want to learn more about that, you can go onto our and listen to our past podcasts. The other one would have to be the Labunga series. I really? I loved the Labunga series.
Did you?
Yeah. See, because my first comic, the comic that kind of hooked me was right around that period. So learning about the Labunga series and finding out the new story and you know, like the three-way battle between the Phantom, the Lager, and Labunga, and Rhodia, and Chastity Dark, and you know, all these other elements that kind of came in. It was like a thriller movie, you know, type of You know, can the Phantom defeat it? Will the Phantom, know the Phantom's defeated by Labunga? I really enjoyed that saga, and it was it's the first time that Team Phantom, after creating stories in the 60s, so 25, 30 years before they actually really went away from the Lee Fork highway, I guess. They kind of veered off and then came back later, and they've kind of, been doing a snaky ever since. But it was, for me, I really enjoyed that series.
I'd like to see the next annual being that whole presidential saga. We've had the traditional, Falcon Barry in the last issue and all that sort of stuff. So it'd be nice to go Scandinavian for the next one, and having that election saga might be the one to do it.
So you enjoyed the saga, the ongoing saga as well?
Well, like you, it was that was when I was first getting into it, and I remember being sometimes a little bit confused between Labunga and Lawaga and who was who, and who am I going for here, and Lawaga and the Phantom Final, I thought they were mates, and so it'd be good to read it again in a package.
Well, I've actually often thought, because I've got a binded Phantom kind of hardcover thing that is kind of custom made. I've actually often thought about pulling out getting doubles and getting all of the Labunga series and putting them actually in a binder to actually read them, one after the other. That's how I actually started collecting my comics as well. I like Dan, before I even looked after my comics, I had them in Lever Arch files, and I had a separate one for the Labunga series, and so I'll put every comic that was in the Labunga series in that folder, so then I can just pull it out and reread them.
But it would have been in the wrong order. Like the numbers are all out of order. How did the OCD part of you survive that?
Well, you buy doubles, and so you put them in there.
It's so it begins.
Yeah. That's where So it was just exciting. And listening, I know we've had discussions with Mikkel Lick, Paul Andreas from Norway as well, and that was similar about really enjoying that saga as well. So I'm sure there's plenty of others out there that enjoyed that series, not like you, Dan.
No, well, I'd definitely buy it, and it would sit on my bookshelf in sealed condition. I'd never have to open it. The collection would be complete.
What about things from the 2000s, Dan? What are some things you've enjoyed from them? What are some big events that happened there?
The big events from the 2000s, and I do have, as I sort of alluded there before, I want to go. There's a bit of continuation from the 90s for me, but in terms of the big events of the 2000s, Moonstone Books publishing the Phantom comic in the United States has got to be listed as a huge event, because they have gone on to become the most prolific publisher of the Phantom and knew the Phantom stories in America, if we're talking about purely comic books. So that was huge. Unfortunately and surprisingly, really, on the back of the movie, we started to see a decline of interest in the character in Europe and Australia, which is unusual, and maybe a lot of people walked out of the cinema with a similar bad taste in the mouth to mine. It must be said that the Phantom movie has gone on to become a cult success, and that really started in the 2000s with the release of the VHS and then the DVDs and all the rest of it. But and the fact that it's on regular rotation on Win, I think, Win Channel 9 here in Australia. It seems to be on every probably 10th or 12th Friday night for a little while. Ulf and Sweden saving the newspaper strips. So that little note refers to the fact that with Lee Falk gone, there was no one to be the writer of the newspaper strip. So Ulf Grunberg stepped in and helped out King Feature Syndicates while they were between writers, basically. And there's about 5 or 6 stories there where Ulf Grunberg or Claystrom was the facilitator. Claystrom Murthy was passing stories on to the newspaper strip, and then Tony DePaul started, so that the two of those guys tag teamed a little bit for a while. But basically, without the influence of Sweden, it's quite possible that the newspaper strips would have fallen over. And then we've got the introduction of some significant characters in the Team Fundament stories. We had Sandor Singh.
Your favourite?
Yep, volumes could be written about her, but also in the newspaper strip and the stories that we should actually care about, the Python as a Shatu as a villain, who would become an ongoing thorn in the Phantom's side. So, Germ, you're having a chortle there at some of the things that I've just said, so I might pass over to you. What were some of the big events for you, the most significant and important? Your favourite things to happen in the 2000s?
Well, I'd like to say Sandor Singh just to kind of wind you up. But no, probably Moonstone will probably be my biggest favourite influential moment. I was a fan on the Phantom Forum. I was heavy in the Phantom Forum, reading, the Frew comics. And then the fact that we got Moonstone, which were in colour, which had a different style to Frew and all that type of stuff. And they were readily available in Australia. It was exciting to be able to, and I think this is probably where my completeness bug was kind of caught. I was collecting Frew comics and Moonstone comics, and then it was like, well, I'm getting those, so I might as well get some other comics from around the world, and so it was an exciting time for me because I was able to, read some of these stories, and I really enjoyed a majority of the Moonstone stories.
Was this the first time you had a disposable income as well?
No, I was at uni, but I actually had more money before uni because I was living at home and stuff like that. When I went to uni, I actually had to pay for everything myself.
Doesn't that suck?
I had to pay rent, I had to pay, board and all that other type of stuff that kind of sucks. And then,
well, I've got a daughter in year 12, so I'm excited to hear that.
No, you're soft, mate. You'll probably end up paying for
probably.
So that was probably my biggest moment. A significant moment to me has to be, and you alluded to it, when Elf Granberg and Phantom Men kind of stepped in and took the role over Lee Falk with the newspaper strips. And it took probably a good 10 years for them to kind of find their mark, to be truthfully honest. But, while some of the stories in the, 2000s weren't that exciting, and we were having new creators and stuff like that and new artists, but the fact that we were still getting newspaper stories was a great moment for me. Stephen?
I'm just making sure that one of the things I've said actually happened during that decade.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Dan?
Stephen sounds like he's just walked into an echo chamber. I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. I've walked into the garage. Andrew's just gone to bed, so I went and moved myself away. I'm just looking at the Death of Diana story.
That's at the 2010s. I also just looked that same thing up. Yeah, that's very early in the next decade.
Okay. So that's just knocked one off my 2000s. But I've got the Python and DePaul taking over the strip as my big things of the 2000s.
Yeah.
The Python being, and I should put, did the Nomad come as well in the 2000s?
No, next decade.
So the next decade. So yeah, I reckon they're the two biggest things of that decade, as well as the new artists that come along. I think there's a whole bunch of new newspaper artists during this time, who all did great things with the character. But with the Death of Diana story is next decade, well, I'm going to say the Python and DePaul.
No worries.
Because I didn't know about Moonstone until later.
Yeah, for myself, I spent the 2000s basically holus bolus in far northwest Queensland, up in Mount Isa, and so I was a long way away from a comic book store and didn't have any idea about the Moonstones and that sort of thing until afterwards. So from my more isolated vantage point, similar to what Steve has just said there, I suppose the fact that the newspaper strip survived the death of Lee Falk, and this is what I was sort of alluding to there before in terms of succession plans. It didn't seem like there was one, and clearly they didn't actually think ahead about what might happen when Lee Falk goes, and whether he didn't let that happen, and perhaps the whole strip would have been better and moved on more easily. There might have been a transition period if he'd sort of said, similar time to Cy Barry in 1993-94. If Lee Falk had said then, well, maybe it's time to take a step back and I'll let my ghostwriter suddenly be credited and that sort of thing, but still be a consultant, that sort of stuff for 5 or 6 years, that might have made the 2000s more. You said there before, Jim, it took 10 years to hit its straps. So that might have helped. And you can look back and go, well, what if? But just the fact that the newspaper strip survived, and it's a credit to those Scandian team who helped out. And then again, as Steve said, the variety of artists, and I'll just run through the artists that worked on the daily strip and the Sunday through the 2000s. So we've got George Olsen and Keith Williams for the first half of the decade, Paul Ryan in the latter half of the decade, and then on the Sundays, I'll just bring up that list.
You got Fredericks and Graham Nolan.
Were they the only two?
Yeah, because then Paul Ryan took over.
Paul Ryan took over the Sundays as well. So, so we saw, and I guess the point of that is that's the highest turnover of artists we had in a single decade for the entirety of the strip. Remember that in the 1990s, we saw the finish of the third Phantom artist, Cy Barry after McCoy and Moore. And then all of a sudden, here we are 10 years later, and we've got a different 5, 6, 7 artists who have all worked on the newspaper strip. So just that turnover was remarkable.
Yeah, definitely. All right, the 2010s. Whose turn is it? I'll go. So the big events in the 2010s, we've got Jim Shepard's death, which is probably a fairly obvious one. After the death of Jim Shepard, you've got the Free Crew. So very similar as what you said. You've got a very staple ownership running of the Phantom comic. You had Ron Forsyth and one other guy up until the 80s, Jim Shepard, and then in the space of about 2 years, you've got Steve Shepard, you've got Judah Shepard, then you've got the Free Crew. So there was that transition period as well. The introduction of Nomad, which is one of Stephen's, will be no doubt one of Stephen's big moments of the decade. And then again, with what you were saying, you got the numerous swapping of newspaper artists. So in the dailies, you had Paul Ryan and Mike Manley, and in the Sundays, you had Ryan, Eduardo Barrado, Terry Beattie, and then Jeff Weigel as well. So again, it was a bit of a cycle through, and again, there's various reasons. There's the death of, say, Paul Ryan and Edward Barreto, and then so there's those which are untimely, you can't plan for, which kind of throw things up in the air as well. I really believe that the newspaper stories, this is maybe just my opinion, but the newspaper stories really hit its strap in the 2010s. You've got the death of Diana saga, the Nomad. You've got the continuation of the stories as well. The stories are actually kind of make sense. They're not just once-offs. And then you've got Ulf Granberg, who retired. In one of our podcasts, we had him. I think we all had him in our top 5. Most influential Phantom people, with what he did with the Phantom from the 70s until the 2010s. And then you've got the Kid Phantom as well, which was an attempt, I guess we can call it, from Free to basically the Free Crew to try and get a new generation of Phantom fans. And hopefully we will be able to see that has worked, down the track and stuff like that. Stephen, you look like you're ants in your pants and you're itching to go, mate. So tell us, what was your favourite moments of the 2010s?
Of the 2010s, well, I said it before, the death of Diana's story. We'll go with that one. That was a big one for the 2010s. It's just a huge, modern epic story. And not just that story, but and you mentioned it a second ago, the newspaper stories have overlapping plots and interweaving plot lines that they're not standalone stories. They are continuing on, and the dailies, like particularly with the Nomad, it's been a major figure right up until, when was it? Oh, it would have been 2019. When I know that we only just read it in the newspapers recently.
2018, I think it might have finished.
18.
Time flies.
Yeah. So he's been a huge influence on the character and the stories. What else have we got? Oh, the Fruit. You can't go past the Fruit crew being taking over and having lots of wonderful ideas. Not all of them have caught on, but they're out there and they're trying to do something with the character, which is great. And it'd be great if more people saw it. Yes.
Can I ask you a question about the Fruit crew, and then Dan, when Stephen's finished, I want you to answer this as well. Has the Fruit crew being created now? Has that? How can I say this delicately without offending people? Has Jim Shepard's death been a blessing to see the Fruit crew improve the Phantom comic?
I wouldn't call it a blessing.
Maybe that's not the wrong word.
But whenever someone new takes over a role, like you see it every time in a job. They should be building on what the person before them done. You see this nearly everywhere. That when someone is getting towards the end of their tenure in a role, the quality begins to slip, and you prefer them to notice it themselves and realize I should get someone in to take over now. And there is no doubt that things were beginning to slip towards the end of Jim. The covers for one, and the quality was beginning to slip in the Phantom comic. And then the Fruit crew have come in and just reinvigorated. There's better quality paper. The first thing you see is the front cover of the Phantom, and the front covers are just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's the hardest thing to pick out of when we do our yearly awards is the best cover. These would have blown everything away in the from the past 85 years.
Except for the ones with the yellow title bar, they were good.
I don't want to put the explicit warning on this. So I think the Fruit crew have done a wonderful job, and it's unfortunate that it's had to take Jim's passing to make it happen. Would have been nice if there was some sort of succession there if he was no longer up to it. But they didn't take over straight away, did they? It was Steve and Judy, I think.
Judith, yeah. So there was about a 2-year period.
Yeah, and then things were up in the air and whatever. And this whole period of uncertainty. And then when the Fruit crew came in, and whole new lease of life, and it was phenomenal. And doing things like Kid Phantom, which I think is a great initiative. The giant size, bringing that in particularly for the oldies who love those old ones. But that's brought me in. I really liked reading those giant size. Phantom's World, which didn't really pick up because there was some real rubbish stories in that one, unfortunately. And that just turned me off, and I haven't really given it. And I know you guys have said that it turned itself around, but I just haven't had the time to go read those other ones. But what is great is seeing these original Australian stories coming through. And I think we saw that beginning in the 2010s, and in the 2020s we've been getting them in what are we now, 2021? Yeah, we saw a few last year, and over the last couple a couple of years. Coming through in the newspaper, in the Fruit comics. So I think that's a huge thing that we're now having Australian stories, which are not just being printed in Fruit, but being printed over in Egmont.
That's a good point. And we must correct the record. It's 3 that have been published by Egmont, and not just the 2 as well. So thank you, Mikkel, for correcting us on that one. Dan, anything you want to add?
Well, I guess to answer your question from earlier, I would pretty much agree with everything Stephen said there. That it is a shame, and similar to what I just said about Lee Falk, I suppose that Jim Shepherd also, you could argue that, and argue probably quite successfully, that the last 5-6 years of his tenure, maybe the last 10 years of his tenure, weren't up to the standard of what he'd been producing earlier. And as Steve said, you'd like to think that people know to go out at their best, but who does? So many footballers play 1 year too many. So many sports people play 1 year too many. I've probably been 1 year too many on the podcast. Like there's, you've got to know when to go out on a high. You know what I mean? So what it was fantastic, and I've said this as one of my top moments of the decade, is that Frew survived. Through the fact that and to use the really negative terminology that Jim Shepherd ran it into the ground. I don't think he did that, but you could argue that he was running it lower. And then the fact that Steve was able to step in and stop it from going under altogether, and Judith supported him there, and they negotiated the sale to the Frew crew, and as we know it today, and that those guys came in and hit the ground running. It was like Glenn Ford had written down every idea he'd ever had on how he'd do Frew if he ever owned it, and then suddenly he owned it and he wanted to do all of it. And we were the beneficiaries of that, and some things have worked and some things haven't. You could argue that maybe they bit off more than they can chew, but by goodness, they've chewed like hell. So, the work that what they've given us in Australia, certainly, and hopefully a lot of Frew products have gone around the world, the last 5 years has just been sensational. So, so certainly the Frew publications, regular comic, coming out every fortnight, surviving in Australia has got to be one of the highlights of the decade. And the other one for me is, of course, the birth of Expand the Phantom podcast. That's obviously the second most important international thing that has happened in the world of the fandom. It's certainly provided the three of us with a lot of amusement, and hopefully some of the listeners. And many thanks to Joe Douglas for kicking off Chronicle Chamber back in 2006, and then Expand the Phantom podcast in, 2015, I think was the first one. So good on you, Joe.
Yes, that's a very good one. We probably should have put Chronicle Chamber in the 2000s, but oh well. So
we'll put it there now.
yeah, we'll put it in the notes. And who said the 2000s? I think it was you, Stephen. You missed it.
No, I did 1990s. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Mine would be, so a lot of the ones we've already touched upon, like the Frew crew, and then the standard of the newspaper stories. But the other one for me would be that Frew has started to rival Egmont as the main Phantom publisher. Because before it was just Egmont was basically the bee's knees. And now, Frew has improved so much that, we can finally have an argument of who is the better publisher of the Phantom. So for me, that's a fairly key moment in the 2010s, along with all the other ones that we have discussed.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that Frew doesn't publish in colour?
Well, funny you should talk about colour.
Using it sporadically.
If you want to hear a good discussion about the Phantom and colour, episode 180 is a great podcast about the Phantom and colour. And talking about the Frew crew, episode 183 will be a 5-year retrospective review of the Frew crew as well. So, there's some nice little tie-ins. But before we talk too much about the next one, we've got the 2020s. So this is where we play Nostradamus, and we pretend we know what we're talking about, and we have some fun. So, Dan, get your crystal ball out, i.e. your head, put a light bulb behind it and start rubbing it, and tell me what you think is going to happen in the 2020s.
I think that the comic strip is probably going to stop appearing in newspapers. I think that newspapers are largely going to stop existing in hard copy form. If we're talking by 2030, I think that newspapers are largely going to stop existing in hard copy form, so they're going to go digital, and then whether they have to then pay for a link back to Comics Kingdom or whatever. So I worry for the future of the broader publication in that sense, in the hard copy publication of the Phantom strip. How King Features negotiate that strip's survival then in a digital world, I think, is crucial to pretty much everything else that follows. Because if they can't negotiate that, then there's a chance that, I want the Phantom to get to 100. There's 15 years left, and there's no guarantees. The Phantom has proven to get past the death of the creator in 1999, as I said, and got past, everything else. Yeah. So hopefully there will be a way that is found. But that's my biggest worry, I guess, for the next decade.
Well, you have Spider-Man that has ceased. And it could be argued that Spider-Man in the newspaper stories, is a more popular character than the Phantom. And that newspaper series has ended. So that's a very good call. And I guess what hurts with that is the fact that you're paying three creators. You're paying Tony DePaul, Mike Manley, and Jeff Weigel.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very big call, and it's not a big reach. Anything else that you can think of that?
I'd like to think. Look, the 2020s has started really well, sorry, not globally.
Really?
If you purely got the Phantom mask on.
Which reality are you living in?
Sorry, mate, I'm not in lockdown. I apologise.
Queenslanders.
From the biggest faux pas of the year.
Yeah, that's the poster. Look, from a purely Phantom perspective, and I'm probably caught up in the moment, having tried, got the Phantom card game arrived the other day, and the board game, people are getting it, and so. But I think that
awesome things would happen if I had them in lockdown. I'd have something to do.
Yeah, and you just about need lockdown to learn how to play the card game. I think I'm trying to teach myself today.
You're just old.
Probably. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that there's and this is a complete flip side of what I've just said. But I'm hopeful that there's enough interest that whether it is new comic book stories and hopefully a TV series or a movie or whatever it might be, but certainly the merch. People seem to still be interested in Phantom merch. So hopefully there's enough interest for it to kick on.
Stephen, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit more optimistic. I think newspapers still have a place in the world now. Whether they are going to go completely digital and be no hard copy, I'd still like to think that there'll still be a comic section in the digital newspaper. Like I read the newspaper now digitally. I read it on my phone or the iPad or the computer. But I read it like it was a traditional newspaper, so it's still got the comics page in there. So hopefully we still, and of course if the newspapers dwindle and there's no physical, and that doesn't just affect the Phantom strip, it affects hundreds of strips. So hopefully for all those comics' sake, newspapers survive, because I do enjoy reading me a bit of a Hagar the Horrible and Ginger Megs and what have you. But looking a bit more optimistic, I'd love to see a TV series. We've said this a number of times. A Netflix series, it's just made to, it's ready to go. Like you got 85 years of stories there to choose from. Even if you just go for the last 20 years with DePaul stuff, there's 3 or 4 seasons, you go bang, and Netflix can make anything out of anything. So go for it.
Yes. I watched a Polish rom-com last night, so yes, they can make anything out of anything.
Now, there's always been I've seen new Voltron movie cartoons, the classic 80s with the lines and stuff. There's been new Scooby-Doo cartoons. There's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles seem to be new generations of that every couple of years. Why can't we get new Defenders of the Earth cartoon at the
Yeah.
least. Or on a much bigger scale, get a movie that begins a Defenders of the Earth cinematic universe. That'd be the bee's knees. That'd be awesome sauce. But a little bit more closer to home, and probably a little bit more realistic, is the merchandise. February is going to be the year of the Phantom game. We've got the card game that's rolling out. We've got the board game that's been coming out. We got the Malon Diary that's coming out. We're all wearing Phantom T-shirts. Yes, we kind of produced these ones, but the one Dan's got. I'd love to see more Phantom merch. And it's still like it was the stuff that was released just this past Christmas. I can't get those puzzles and whatever at Sanity anymore. That people still love the Phantom. We still want to pick up, we don't want the market flooded like, Doctor Who and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But we still want to have the Phantom carve a niche in there, so you can go into a Target or you can go into a JB Hi-Fi and you can say, "Oh, it's Phantom stuff," and pick it up, or those Smoke Mart shops, and the modern day What's News, and pick up a Phantom stuff, and that's what I'd really like to see, and not just, but also the continuation of the Free Crew growing and more Australian content in the comic. That's what I'd really like to see. More Australian content with our fantastic creators that we've got here, like Paul Mason winning awards for his Phantom work recently. I think who's the other one? Shane Foley, I think, also won awards.
Well.
So we've got these top quality Phantom artists who are knocking it out of the park. So let's see more Australian content.
Awesome.
And overtake Phantom.
This is the Australian pride coming into it. I think one of the things that might save the Phantom comic strip not dying or not ending, like Dan talked about, is the fact that it still gets published into a Free comic and into the Phantom Men comic. So that might be the saving grace, is the fact that they are publishing it, and that's trying to be optimistic after starting this whole looking into the 20s on a downer. For me, no, it's a brilliant point, and it's a very very astute call, to be truthfully honest. Everything that you said, Steve, sounds fantastic. If I was to say something that if I was to say something that hasn't been discussed, I would like to see a combination of Team Phantom and the Free Crew actually pooling their resources together and creating more stories. So you've got you've kind of got two groups acting on their own, and you've got creators going from one to the other group, Team Phantom into all through, or vice versa and stuff. I would like to kind of see, I guess a whole team Phantom Men or Phantom group joining together, and then actually having someone who's in charge of that and creating stories. That I would like to think we'd be able to create more stories. We'd be able to find a successor for Claes Remifi, who surely is coming towards the close of his tenure. And I just think that might be something that might save a little bit of money for both publishers, with budgets, being what they are, and with 2020 being a bit of a crap year, saving a little bit of money could be a good thing. So that's what I think, if I was to look into the future, we might see in the 20s.
I hope we don't. I disagree. I want to keep them separate entities, but share each other's stories. Because I think bringing them together, creating Team Fruiterman, might dilute they've got people. I'm going to take Dan for instance, who has been a big supporter of the Australian stories, but hasn't really liked the Egmont stories. Now, all of a sudden, if Egmont and Frew are working together, is that one's going to override the other at some stage? And so, I don't want to see a monopoly on it. I like the two separate entities.
It's a really interesting conundrum because on the one hand, I can see your point, Jim, in that the getting all the brains trust together and going, right, here's the direction we're going to take the character, whether we're creating them in Sweden or creating them in Australia. But overall, this is the arc that we're going to go down the road of. I can see the benefit of that. But by the same token, I think the competition's really good. And I think it also keeps each other honest in terms of sticking to Phantom lore, because I think fans like Phantom lore and don't like stories that stray too far from it. If you had one brains trust that was sort of in charge of itself, you run the risk of
Claes Ramufi having Sandal Singh having an illegitimate son.
Well, look, let's just say that if Claes retires in the next year or two, then it will prove that the last 10 years of his career is probably one that he should have walked away from before he said, maybe he didn't leave early enough either. Nadir, the down point of his career, in my humble opinion. I'm with Steve. I would not like to see them conglomerate. Maybe share ideas more and go, hey, we're thinking this. What do you think? And maybe along that track, and perhaps with and this is absolutely no criticism of Mikel Sol, because I think he did a wonderful job as editor while he was at. And he currently is as we speak, but it's not for very much longer as the editor of Team Fundament. But I do think that as we understand it, the relationship between Andreas Eriksson, who's stepping into his chair, and the team at Frew is, they've got a well-established relationship. So whether they are on the phone to each other or in a Zoom meeting like we are, or just on the old-fashioned pen and paper posting letters, who knows? But they probably are going to be sharing ideas more than has been done in the past. But yeah, I'm like Steve. I wouldn't like to see an official coming together of Team Fruiterman, as you so eloquently put it.
Well, there's still 9 years for them to kind of sort all those issues out as well. But now make sure if you're on social media, you let us know what you would like to think will happen in the future as well for the next decade. And then also, you might also want to let us know what your favourite decade is. Do you like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the swinging 60s, or the hippie 70s? When Dan was born, or the cool 80s when Stephen and Jermaine were born, or the 90s with the movie, or the 2000s, or the 2010s, or the 2020s. What is your favourite decade? So make sure you let us know. Hit us up on social media. And so before we go, guys, I would like to know what your favourite decade is. Dan.
I was hoping to go last because I'm going to cheat.
Okay, Stephen.
Well, I've written down the 90s because that was the decade that I really got into it. But now that we've been talking, it's going to be tight between the 90s and the 2010s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, particularly with the upturn in Tony DePaul stuff and in the Frew Crew and the stuff that's happening there. So, it's a good call. I'm still going to go 90s, but 2010s isn't far behind.
It has been a really good decade that we've just come out of.
Yeah, it started off weak, but it's ended really good.
Yeah. Whereas 90s, I'm going to 90s on top, just more merch.
Yeah,
so the numbers.
So the 80s and the 90s were me because I became a fan in the 90s, and so there was the movie, there was Frew bringing out all this cool stuff, there's all that type of stuff. But then the 80s, while I wasn't a fan in the 80s, I always look back at it with envy with the Phantom Club, and I enjoyed if I was to say the best number of comics would have to be 900 to 1,000. That was kind of like the sweet spot for Frew. I love I love all of those comics in that era. So that was the 80s or the 90s for me. But I really like your call of the 2010s, Stephen. That might be the smartest thing you've said all night, my friend.
You just haven't been listening.
So, Dan, now that you can cheat and copy everyone else's homework, what is your favourite decade?
No, that's not how I'm cheating. And I will say that Steve's call of the 2010s is a good one. And the 80s and 90s is
an obvious one.
Hey,
It's an obvious one.
It is, I guess, for our generation, it's the nostalgic one. I'm going to say, and this is how I'm cheating. I'm going to say from 1955 through to 1965. So I'm taking a 10-year period, but I'm taking the second half of the 50s and the first half of the 60s, because I just think that in terms of establishing and maturing the character into the character that we all knew from birth, because that was obviously before we were born. The stories that Lee Falk was writing at that time, the quality of the art that Wilson McCoy was producing, and then by going through to 1965, I get to sneak Cy Barry in as well, and his first couple of years on the strip. So I'm taking that 10-year window. I'm calling it a decade. It's the Phantom from 20 to 30 years old, so that's a decade. Yeah, that's what I'll do.
Good cheat.
Yeah, I would have thought as a teacher you wouldn't be able to cheat like that, but
He knows how to manipulate the rules. That's
yeah, that's it. So happy birthday, the Phantom. I hope you enjoyed our podcast on the 85th birthday. Before we do sign off, we do want to quickly talk about the Phantom Diary that will be out soon. So basically what we talked about tonight is sort of covered in a snapshot in the diary, and as there is a really good review not a review, what would it be, a showing, a preview?
Yeah, a preview
of the diary on our YouTube channel and on our website. So have a look at that and you'll see they've broken everything down in the decades as well, and we've helped out with some of that. And that's one of the reasons why we've decided to go with that. So, it's a cool idea, but it also kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what the diary is all about. So if you are interested in the diary, make sure you email them at info@malon.net.au, and Malon is MALLON. If you're on YouTube, we'll have that little email address down below. If you're also on YouTube, we'll have all the pop-ups and all the stuff we've discussed popping up all over the screen. So if you like having a little bit of imagery to cover our mugs, make sure you head over to YouTube as well. So we thank you everyone for listening to us. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed the 2 hours or just under 2 hours of us dissecting the 85 years. 2 hours just talking about 85 years isn't bad.
That's not bad.
Now, you can subscribe with us on iTunes or Spotify or on apps like Podbean, Player FM, Castbox, and of course, we're on YouTube as well. Our website is chroniclechamber.com. We're all over Facebook, we're all over Instagram, we're all over Twitter. And if you want to do us the old school method of email, you can email us at chroniclechamber@gmail.com. Now, guys, I really enjoyed tonight. Really enjoyed talking 85 years with yous. I know we were only alive for roughly half of those. But for myself, guys, thank you for participating. Thank you for joining us. Phantom, happy birthday, buddy. Thank you for surviving 85. Here's to 100. And for myself, happy Phantom.
Happy Phantom.
Happy Phantoming.